Hey everyone, it's Richard Farmer. Welcome back to Work Right with Rich, the show where we have honest, unfiltered conversations about what it actually takes to make work. Now, today's topic is one that everyone in business is buzzing about: learning in the age of AI. You can't scroll LinkedIn these days without seeing upskilling, frictionless learning, or AI-powered training. But here's the thing: for a lot of people on the ground, workplace learning still feels like a big chore. Bloated slide decks, outdated modules, non-interactive formats that are somehow less interactive than a PDF. So today we're cutting through the hype to talk about what really works, and I've got the perfect person for this conversation. A new friend of mine, Shane Baetz, right from Manila. He's joining us. So bit of an intro on Shane. Shane spent over 15 plus years in the BPO industry in the Philippines in various leadership roles. And right now, he's leading training, leadership development, and learning design at Foundever across APAC, LATAM, and North America, with a deep focus on leveraging AI and other technologies. And also, he's been named a global Thinkfluencer by Tigerhorn, which is a great business. Shane, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Oh, fantastic. Right, let's us just jump right in and start with the first question, which is a doozer. So, Shane, AI is everywhere in L&D right now. From your view, what's genuinely exciting and what's just noise dressed up as innovation? What's getting you really excited?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what we've seen over the last year and a half, 2 years is there's so much hype around AI, right? I think from a learning perspective, some of the things that I see is really compelling as we move ahead is the ability to have adaptive learning paths for learners. And what I mean by that is over time, we're going to see more and more of the ability to dynamically adjust learning content based on real-time learner performance and not kind of preset branching. And I think that's important because the reality is we all kind of come to the table with different skill sets, different levels of experience. And so the ability to kind of pivot what we put in front of learners based on how they're responding to content, what they bring in the door, I think is exciting. I think the other piece that I think is going to be a game changer for us is the ability to have AI as kind of a always on practice partner. When you've got conversational agents that let people safely kind of rehearse conversations or negotiations. So for example, for my organization, we've embedded AI simulators into our leadership development programs now. And so if we're, helping develop someone to have a difficult performance conversation, the ability for them to kind of rehearse and practice in a safe environment and also get feedback while they're doing it, I think that's huge for us. But I think as well, kind of like on the analytics side, what it allows us to do is kind of move learning away from kind of like hours delivered as kind of like a key metric, and more kind of looking at, defining measurable impacts on performance, which are going to be easier to identify and link back to the business. And then the last one I'd say that's, I think real is, we're using AI a lot now when it comes to developing content. So from a curriculum design perspective, that gives us the ability now to really kind of customize the content that we're put it together quicker. But kind of going back to some of those simulations that we do with AI, we have the ability through some of the tools to replicate different demeanors, to adjust on the fly how that conversation flows. And so that intelligent content creation, I think, is really compelling as well. And then, on the flip side, again, there's a lot of hype. I think some of the things that are probably more noise is, I think what we see with some of the tools and things out in the market is there's a lot of things that will kind of position themselves as being AI powered, which is really maybe just glorified search. And, we're surfacing content that's just, tied to keywords, right? There's not really any AI kind of below the surface. I think the other risk a little bit is over automating content without a sort of human review, right? So if I can generate learning content, but I don't have a human in the loop to actually look through and say, is this accurate? Are we coming up against any hallucinations? Is there any potential compliance issues I'm bumping up against?
Yeah.
That's a risk. And I think just, gamification was really popular, and equally hyped up a few years ago in the learning space. And I think sometimes what we're seeing is there's, uh, what I call like gamification 2.0, but kind of in AI clothing. And so, you can have these quests and kind of like things that, are AI fueled. But again, if there's no tangible application or outcome, like, is there really any value coming out of it?
Yeah, I totally agree. You made some excellent points because I think one thing with AI is that we'll be able to get content out quicker and build programs, which is fantastic with how fast things are moving. But we can't lose the humanization of it because one of the things of learning is learning from other people as well. Uh, and I suppose that just rolls really nicely in some of the things you said into the next point, because there is a rush to roll out new tools to solve problems. What questions should L&D professionals and leaders be asking? What I'd be asking before they bring AI to their programs? Should they be reviewing what they already have or looking at just using AI going forward? What would be your advice to L&D leaders about bringing AI into their programs?
Yeah, I think for me, I think what's happening now a lot of times is we're trying to address things in reverse. And what I mean by that is, for me, the starting point should be, what is the specific problem or performance gap that we're trying to solve? And then is a tool or an application or AI even the answer, right? One of the things that always kind of stuck with me is, in a previous organization, we had acquired a company that was doing large scale RPA, so robotic process automation.
Yeah,
And I spent some time with the owner, and he said, one of the things that's interesting, and they were doing large scale RPA. They would work with banks and, transform accounting functions, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, when we meet with clients, a lot of conversations out of the gate coming from them is kind of like, what tools are you going to use? Are is it UiPath, et cetera, et cetera. For me, he said, the starting point is always the process. Is the process optimized? Because if you have a bad process and you automate it, all you're doing is making a bad process work faster, right? So I think the starting point really needs to be like, what is it we're trying to do? Because I think, again, because there's been this rush, and I think pushed a lot of organizations to go find AI and start using it. People kind of start there, and it's like, well, what can we use this for? And it really should be the opposite. So I think that's for me a big question. I think some other questions are, what is the impact on learners? If we start adopting this in our ecosystem, does this make the learning more relevant? Does it make it more personalized? Is it effective? But a big one also is kind of like the measurement and ROI. There's there's costs that come with using some of this technology as well. And so if we're going to start adopting some of these tool sets and capabilities, are we offsetting the costs, and are we realizing real performance gains that come with it? And what is the ROI we're looking to drive? So I think those are big questions. Risks and ethics, again, going back to compliance. Where's the data coming from? Where's it going to be stored, especially if you're working in kind of cross geo environments? And so I think a lot of times it's also, can we pilot first and scale later? I think that's a really important question for L&D leaders to kind of look at, is like, rather than kind of like jumping directly into the deep end, can we experiment, pilot, see what we can learn from it, and then figure out, does it make sense to take it bigger from there?
yeah. A great comment, Shannon. It's all about try, test, try. I really like the point about if you go too far too quickly or just use AI for the sake of AI, well, what's the actual outcome, right? How are you actually building that? Because, I think it also comes down to making sure you're addressing the learning styles of everyone in your organization. Some people are learn very well online. Some people actually want that interaction. They want to ask questions. So how does that respond if you're using an AI component? At sales, we look at CXC, we do also recruitment, and we find talent, and the pushback around, can you use AI for interviews or not? What is that reaction and interaction you have? And I think learning is very aligned to that. I did a lot of learning development, had my own consultancy, and, experiential learning is very important. So what part of that becomes that? Because as we said, with AI going forward, that human interaction again about, how you speak to someone, how you address them is going to be big key. So I think that's going to be a big piece of that. And I think that's great advice for those L&D leaders out there. Uh, One of the things that, from your business at Found Ever, which is fantastic, it's a large, large business. Now, you'd be built learning for huge diverse teams, so moving programs and products. What's the biggest thing that companies forget, do you think, when they design learning at scale? Especially when, if AI isn't evolved. Well, what's that missing piece of the a jigsaw when they are building these large programs?
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit on what I see as, the probably one of the biggest things that companies forget is, when you're designing learning at scale, you've got to consider the human layer, and not just in the delivery, but in trust, context, change readiness. Learners need to trust in the tool. They've got to trust that whatever they're getting and whatever it's driving them towards is accurate, that it's unbiased. Um, and I think also there's a real need around managing through change fatigue and even digital literacy. Like we spent some time a couple months ago doing an internal week purely focused on kind of AI and tools and capabilities, and really ensuring that we're helping and drive literacy, and getting people hands on and beginning to experiment. But also, again, when there's so much kind of coming out, kind of managing just all those different pieces. Every learner kind of comes in the door with different backgrounds and experiences. And so, what's interesting is, in my role, I work with a number of the industry groups in the Philippines. And I was in a session a few weeks ago. There was a speaker who is he's a professor for a university in Barcelona specializing in AI. And he had talked about, a recent study they had done where they took, they looked at two groups. And so one group were people in roles where, what they did was, very manual, very repetitive, didn't allow for a lot of nuance, kind of very clearly defined parameters. And when they applied AI in that environment, the delta between their best people and their worst people closed, because the people that weren't as strong were able to kind of use AI to kind of make up for that. But what was interesting when they looked at another group where high dependency on creativity, on nuance, ambiguity, that when they applied AI in that group, that the delta between the best people and the not best people actually grew. And it makes a lot of sense, because I think it's a tool, and when you give that tool to people that are very creative and can figure out how to maximize it, you're going to get outputs out of it. But part of it is they're comfortable using the technology as well. And so that's where, again, I think for me, when you're designing learning at scale and AI is involved, is how do you account for the digital literacy piece? Some people are going to be very comfortable, some aren't, and they're not all starting from the same spot. So how do you kind of work through kind of building different journeys for those sets of employees?
Yeah, that's great insight. And on that point, we recently did an event with one of our clients. They're talking about AI again. And what they were saying is that everyone's starting from the same level. So no matter what age you are, it's new to everyone. It's not like someone else is further ahead. So that's a very good point about how people learning, because you've got a large organization. You could have a CEO learning about the same thing as someone that's a graduate, right? But massively different learning styles and thought process. And I also think when you're doing a large organization, you've got to account one for language, especially within Asia. But again, you've also got to account, like, there might be people that are dyslexic. There might be people that are on the spectrum that think differently. And that might really help them with their AI. They're becoming more creative. So, we've seen now some AIs that can actually test like, entrepreneurism or creativity. So it's quite fantastic what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
So for this one, let's have a little fun, because I know you're a creative thinker like me. So imagine someone hands you a blank slate, Shane. No legacy systems, no red tape. What would your AI-powered L&D strategy look like? And what would you leave out completely? If you could start today, your own business, where would you start, and what would you say? Let's put that in a bit.
Yeah, I think the starting point is kind of defining the desired business outcomes and not the content. So, what are the 3 to 5 highest impact capabilities that's really going to move the needle for the business in the next 12 or 18 months, and use that as a starting point, kind of, going back to, let the let the problem statement or the need or what have you kind of be the starting point, then figure out the strategy and the tools and the approach from there. I would look to build very agile learning ecosystem. I think what you see in a lot of organizations is you're using maybe kind of a monolithic LMS or database. And I think, having a very kind of agile ecosystem, which is very API friendly, where you can plug into different tools or sources, and that can evolve as tech improves. And I think because that's part of it, right? Like this is all moving so quickly that you've got to be very agile. And you have to have the ability to kind of just keep pace. And then, with that, I think how do you then create an AI enhanced feedback loop where you can use the AI to begin to analyze learner performance data, spot skill gaps, recommend resources or content? I think the dream for me down the road is to be able to build completely customized and differentiated learning paths for learners, again, based on what they bring in the door. Assessing that, using that data to effectively create a profile and say, I think this is who Shane is, and start taking me through learning content. And then based on how I respond to the content, to different types of content, how I'm doing on assessments and practice sessions, et cetera, begin to pivot and say, Shane responds really well to this type of content, so I'm going to put more of that type of content in front of him. Shane's struggling, kind of understanding this concept, so what's some additional supplementary content I can put in front of him, et cetera, et cetera. And so meaning you could have two people sit beside each other being trained on something and have a completely different experience. Because that doesn't happen today. Most organizations, we all go through the exact same course at the exact same pace, irregardless of what we're bringing in the door, irregardless of how we're doing, right? So I think that's the strategy that I would go down. And again, things I would leave out completely is just things that I think are kind of embedded in the consciousness for some LD folks that are just historic, that I think are no longer in play, whether it's, again, these massive LMSs that don't have flexibility, don't have agility, not listening to feedback. You've got to understand, like, as you're rolling this out, as you're deploying it, again, from a human perspective, how are people responding? What do they need more of, less of? I think one of the things I've been really conscious of with in our organization is it's always about a balance, right? Like I can't just pump everything out via e-learning content and be reliant on tech. There is a human piece, and sometimes you need to have a person sitting across from another person and taking them through something, right? And so what I wouldn't leave out completely is the human element, and be completely dependent on the tech, believing that it's some sort of nirvana that's gonna take us to a better place. The human piece is still hypercritical, and for me is not being talked about enough, to be honest.
Yeah, dehumanization. I completely agree, Shane. And I mean, I'd love to be part of that training program. And, starting that desired business outcomes, that's meant there. Use it's training because of training's sake. And I love that personalized journey of, like, actually, we've heard about AI coaches now where they're looking at you going, okay, in the next 6 to 12 months, for them to hit their career goals, they need to have learned these skills, right? You would be able to push that person forward. And you mentioned just at the end about the humanization part. So we've heard so much about automation and efficiency, but there's a difference between, I suppose, helpful and hollow. How do you keep learning human without losing the impact?
Yeah, I think ensuring that you're deliberate about having human engagement and checkpoints is important. So if you are having someone work through a self-paced AI driven program, making sure that is interlaced with human engagement along the way, I think is important, just to preserve those moments. I think again, from a human perspective, right? Storytelling is so important in business, and so AI might be able to generate scenarios, but it's really humans that can kind of bring the messy reality of lived experiences to life, right? So I think keeping storytelling alive is really important, and so ultimately, I think it's where can we use AI for insights and humans for meaning? AI can help analyze patterns and data. But I think for now, there's still a need and dependency to really rely on humans to be the ones to interpret why those patterns exist.
Yeah.
Especially when context or emotions are critical, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at kind of a sales focus, or building that human trust and interaction with the client or candidate, or people in your business. I mean, I love that storytelling piece, because I think, you know, if I look at my career over the past 25 years, you remember the stories of some of the business leaders you've worked with, and they're the ones you take into other companies and share those stories. And we talk about training and learning. It really goes down to the roots of teaching, right? And people remember their favorite teacher, and that's because it was a human person.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
where does that AI interaction come from, right? If you ask anyone around a table, who's your favorite teacher, they'll tell you why. And it could be something that just clicked with them, and it was because of the style, or it could be story, maybe because they were noticed or recognized, they saw good in that person. And that's something that AI can't do at this moment in time, or maybe won't do. So I think you've hit the nail on the head, that storytelling piece and that ability to, think and on your feet and go, actually, this person's not learning this way, we can go that way, and tell a story around it to give it reality, and to bring all the pieces together. It's going to be key. Look, Shay, this has absolutely been brilliant. As always, I love the conversation with you. Thanks for joining us and sharing all your experience and perspectives. I know L&D leaders across Asia will be listening in, because there's some insights on what you've achieved at Foundever as a business. I think your career is fantastic, and your insights around AI has been brilliant. And it's been a joy speaking here, Magnificent Vanilla, to you. And can't wait to catch up with you soon. What I'm really taking away is, with AI, it's great to start looking at it, but what is it actually truly doing? Do we need to use it? Look at your programs now, see what could be automated, but don't lose that humanization, that human touch as you go through, right? Don't just use AI for the sake of it, because it could actually become confusing. And I think the key piece there that I really liked was the really rating keep storytelling alive, because it is so true and impactful. And it's probably, maybe it's my learning style, but I think that's always going to be key as we go forward. And everyone loves a good story. But that's it for today's episode with Work Right with Rich. And I'm Rich, and I'll see you next time. And remember, you always need more caliber. Thank you very much.